Well, hi, I'm Steve Dennis. I'm a consultant, author, and speaker on retail strategy and innovation. I've been in the retail industry a really long time. I don't really like to talk about it. And I'm also the author of Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption.
Thank you, Steve, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So the book, Remarkable Retail, it's coming out at it's very timely, obviously. Not only over the past number of years have we had a growth in e-commerce, but this pandemic has really changed people's buying habits. And I know one of them has been, I know many people have taken advantage of, calling up or going online and ordering, groceries or whatever the case may be, and then, picking them up curbside, right? There's this curbside pickup phenomenon that we've been seeing this year. And you obviously mentioned that in your book, but you also mentioned in your book about the customer is the channel, and you do reference, consumers picking up groceries or shopping curbside. And so I'm wondering if you could explain more about this customer as the channel thing.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of retailers have made over the years, not just during the pandemic, is thinking of e-commerce and brick and mortar as largely distinct operations. And I think what the pandemic has done is, number one, really reinforced the idea and accelerated the stats around how consumers start most shopping journeys in a digital channel, even though the vast majority of those digital shopping journeys end up involving a store in some way. But in particular, what happened with the pandemic is, yes, we saw more kind of traditional e-commerce growth, but we saw a lot more of this behavior where stores are involved in what people call e-commerce. So that's the curbside pickup, that's buy online or return to store. It's online orders that are fulfilled by stores. So if anything, it's actually kind of ironically turned out that stores are going to be even more important for a lot of retailers, even though we've obviously seen a growing shift to e-commerce. But that shift to e-commerce has been going on for 15 years. Like that in and of itself is not new.
Yeah.
So the idea of the customers of the channel is not to think about e-commerce versus brick and mortar. It's to say, well, is to focus on the customer, and our job is to figure out how to reduce the friction between shopping across those channels, but more particularly, really elevate that experience in a way that is truly remarkable. Which is really the thrust and underlying principle in my book.
And previous to this pandemic, the discussion around e-commerce has always been, e-commerce will grow at the detriment of bricks and mortar. But I think we've seen that, one sort of needs the other. E-commerce for grocery stores, at least here in Canada and Toronto, needs the grocery stores in the neighborhoods to fulfill that.
Yeah, right. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, so I was wondering whether or not you had always thought in this way, and whether this will continue even post-pandemic.
So I think a couple of things are going on there that's important. One is there's an aspect of online which, e-commerce and sort of, I hate to say traditional e-commerce because that sounds a little bit funny, but if you think about e-commerce, at least in its early days, it was sort of a better mail order catalog business. It basically used technology to automate ordering, but the basic fulfillment was very similar to what catalog companies have been doing forever, which is to pick, pack, and ship a product in a central distribution location and mail it to you. I think that was e-commerce. That has been the bulk of Amazon's business, for example, other than digital downloading. So e-commerce, that sort of e-commerce, is really great for certain kinds of products, largely around where, it's just convenient, to order it online and have it show up at your home or office. So, that part of e-commerce for the most part doesn't really involve a store. You may go to a store to check out the product and order online. But a lot of e-commerce, and particularly what's happened in the last several years and really accelerated by the pandemic, has involvement from the store, because the customer is either going there to talk to a sales associate or get ideas or put an outfit together or whatever, or I guess the store has a role in fulfilling that order. So it's been going on. And I think just generally people have been a little bit too black and white about talking about e-commerce. And, the main thing is it's really blended all together. The kind of pure e-commerce, for the most part, doesn't really exist. Even some of these newer brands that started online, they're all opening stores because they realize that there's a big aspect of commerce that is a merger or a hybrid of physical and digital.
I know eMarketer recently was talking in one of their episodes about the future of shopping malls. And so, when you think of it just in a black and white framework, you think, okay, shopping malls are going to end, no need to go into a store and walk around and stuff. But I'm curious whether there's a reinvention of shopping malls when we keep this in mind.
Well, I hope so. I think, again, there's a little bit of the devil in the details. I mean,
sure,
shopping malls have been losing. I mean, well, one in the US in particular, but I know in Canada and some other markets, there was a real boom in building shopping markets and shopping malls and shopping centers, for the past 20 years. And so one of the things that happened in general was that the capacity that was developed in malls and shopping centers was much greater than the demand overall. So there was going to be a reckoning at some point, and the pandemic is really forcing that. But the other thing is that a lot of the shopping malls, not all, but a lot of the shopping malls really were highly dependent on apparel and were highly dependent upon department store anchors, most of which have really been struggling for many, many years. And in fact, a lot of people say, oh, well, e-commerce really is what has caused these department stores and malls to get in trouble. And actually, if you look particularly until recent years, most of the market share that was lost by department stores actually went to off-price retailers and discount mass merchants and fast fashion companies and other specialty retailers. It wasn't so much that it was captured by e-commerce. Plus, all of those stores could have e-commerce themselves. Like e-commerce didn't have to be the reason that some of these stores or some of these malls got into trouble. But it is absolutely the case that a lot of these malls were overly reliant on concepts that really didn't innovate enough, and consumer preferences just switched to many more off the mall formats, and then more so in e-commerce. But I think what you generally see is that the very best malls, particularly the ones that are more have a stronger tenant mixes and maybe a good mix of restaurants and entertainment, I think most of those will do pretty well without a tremendous amount of change. But the malls that didn't reinvent themselves and have just a ton of space devoted to retailers that are really dinosaurs in this era, I mean, most of those are either going to get bulldozed or really need to reinvent themselves. So we'll see. I mean, it's hard to attract capital, I think, to invest in some of these more mediocre malls. The malls that have a good customer base, a good tenant mix, I think, they need some reimagination. But I suspect that the top, 20% of malls will do pretty well once we get beyond the pandemic.
That's really interesting. And I'm curious about this one. Small independent companies, they may or may not have a retail location. Maybe they are, working with your traditional grocery stores to get their product on the shelves, but they've started to open up their own e-commerce capabilities, right? So yes, they might have some product on Amazon, but they've got their own, Shopify store.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's an opportunity in e-commerce outside of Amazon, outside of being reliant on shelving fees that these companies have with their own store. Can they compete even with free shipping and things like that Amazon provides?
Well, it's certainly tough for the smaller guys to compete with the big guys. And what I generally say is that you need to really make the different or understand the difference between what I call and talk about a little bit in the book as table stakes and differentiators. And by that, I mean, there are some things that you just have to do to be in the game. So it's pretty hard to imagine how a retailer of any size can have at least basic e-commerce capabilities. And so thankfully, there is Shopify and there is BigCommerce, and there are ways to get those basic functions. Mm-hmm. But you have to be really careful not to chase your tail and engage in a race to the bottom, essentially trying to out Amazon. So generally, I think, figure out those basic features that keep you in the game. But then it's going to be more about leaning into those things that can really make you different. So how can you focus maybe more deeply on a particular set of customers, or offer unique and different products, or offer service? What's that thing that can be different enough that a set of customers care about, that Amazon really, for the most part, or, it could be Walmart, it could be, a whole host of other big retailers. What are those things that customers will value that you can uniquely deliver on? Because if you start in a race to the bottom, or start in a race with Amazon, you're basically going to get to this race to the bottom, and Amazon's always going to have lower prices and, be able to kind of out supply chain you. So pick your battles, pick those basic things that keep you in the game, but pick those places where you can really win over the long term.
And I'm wondering if this delves into this next question. In the second part of your book, you outline and you go into detail about the what you call the 8 essentials.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, Steve, if you could, quickly, go through these 8 essential, and I'm wondering if there is one that might be, the most underrated one that's most overlooked, I would say, by brands or companies.
Sure. So I'll just quickly mention what they are. So the first 6 I do talk about as being table stakes. In other words, if you're not pretty good at them, you're probably at a disadvantage. So number 1 is digitally enabled. So this is the idea of really using digital technology to enhance the customer experience. Number 2 is human-centered, which is just a little bit different spin on thinking about customers, I guess, in a broader way. 3 is harmonized, which is some of what we were talking about earlier, which is really understanding how to blend digital and physical in interesting ways. 4th is, I'm probably going to screw them up in the order, but fourth is mobile. This really is a recognition of that mobile is, when we talk about digitally enabled shopping journeys, more and more that is because customers are shopping wherever they happen to be on sort of some smart device. 5th is personal, which is the idea of treating different customers differently and personalizing the experience. 6 is connected, which is really leaning into just how we're more connected to people, whether that's through social media or getting reviews and other things. And then the 2 differentiators I talk about are memorable, which is how do you create an experience that is really so much better than what the competition can do, that literally customers will talk about, which is the key idea of remarkable. And then 8th is radical, which is mostly about needing to constantly innovate and build a culture of experimentation. As to your question about which one is the least appreciated, I think it's probably personal. I think particularly for smaller retailers, well, I guess really retailers of all sizes, the really big guys sometimes tend to lean on a one-size-fits-all approach. And that often doesn't meet customers in a more, as an intense, customer intense and relevant way as they would like to. I think for smaller retailers, the opportunity is if they've got that local knowledge, they have some unique products, they have the ability to do a more personal experience, they can really leverage that. But I think there just oftentimes tends to be this tendency to do the easier or more efficient thing, which is to tend to treat customers a little bit like they're all the same. And, that's where you can really get into trouble as a big guy by allowing, interesting segments for competitors to go after. As a smaller guy, it's sometimes just chasing your tail, trying to out Amazon or out Walmart.
Steve, thanks so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed and appreciated it. Where, if people want to get a hold of your book, to read more about your thoughts as it pertains to retail, where can they go?
Well, I'm all over social media, generally at Stephen P. Dennis. My website is www.stephenpdennis.com. with a V, pdennis.com. And my book is available at Amazon and just about anywhere else books are sold. So you should be able to find it anywhere.
Again, thank you so much, Steve.
You bet. It was great talking to you.
Power your advertising. Working with Active International enables you to fund your advertising using your company's own products, assets, or even services. We have over 30 years' experience connecting and bringing value to businesses all over the globe, helping many brands scale up into household names. Want to achieve more from your marketing spend? Contact Active International today.